All right, there we go. Hi, everyone. Again, welcome to Pronouns Matter Beyond He and She. And we are here with Andi. Oh, Andi, that's what I forgot to ask you. How do you say that last name right?
Voinovich.
Voinovich, there we go. We are here with Andi Voinovich, who identifies as non-binary. And Andi is going to explain to those of us that may not know what that means. And go through just some other definitions and help us hopefully understand what the difference is between gender identity and what binary, non-binary and binary means. We're going to be educated. My hope this evening is for just to have a conversation that is respectful and understanding, and that it is a conversation. So Andi has said, if you have questions while they're talking, please put them in the chat. And afterwards, when Andi's done with the presentation, we can unmute. And if you want to ask in person, you can. I'll give you a little bio on Andi. Andi is an associate pastor at the First United Methodist Church in Downers Grove. They graduated from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary with a master's in divinity. And before that, Andi received a bachelor's degree in Spanish language and literature from Bowling Green State University in Ohio, with minors in educational studies and gender studies. Did I get all that right?
Nailed it.
All right, nailed it. So with that said, I am going to turn things over to Andi.
All right. So good to be with you tonight. Give me a second while I start the screen sharing, and then I'll give a little bit of information about how we're going to try things out tonight. Oops, wrong button. Here we go. Start slideshow. All right. Can you see the slideshow? If you know where the thumbs up is, a thumbs up would be great. All right. Wonderful. So as we begin, welcome. So good to be with you tonight. A few things I'm asking of us as we get started. As shared, this will be recorded, so feel free to remove your name if you want. And to use the chat box to communicate. The chat box is a helpful way while I'll present kind of the basic information for us to participate together. And then when I'm done, there will be time for a Q&A, and feel free to ask any questions. So some guidelines that I'd like for us to have is curiosity with respect, right? Ask your questions here. Don't be afraid of asking silly questions. As long as you're asking them with respect, they're welcome. And if it's something that maybe you non-binary people might not like to answer, or transgender people, I can give you a heads up, but there's no shame in asking questions in this space. I encourage us to speak for ourselves. Much of what we're talking about today is fluid. So the way that I talk about my experience could be different than other non-binary people. That we be open to fluidity. I'm going to give you some basic definitions, right? Because we're starting, I'm assuming, at kind of a beginning level. So I'm going to start with what I think we can handle in one night. And there's a lot of fluidity. Finally, hold space for others, especially in the Q&A section. If you find that you are super chatty, that is delightful, but maybe take a few seconds to count and see if anybody else has something before you go in for a repeat. Does that sound good? Can we agree to that? All right, so here we go. Let's start with a little wordplay activity. If I say gender, what comes to mind? What are some words that come to mind? Feel free to put them in the chat box. Male and female. Yep, male, female. Any other words that come to mind with gender? So gender, boy, girl, yep. So gender is a social construct, meaning that we, the people, and the systems, institutions, and communities that we are part of build our understanding of gender. Gender is not concrete. There's not one definitive way to express any one gender. So in the United States, some of the ways that we've constructed gender, as you can see in the chat box, is kind of the binary, right? Often around here, we think of gender as being male and female, boy and girl. And even when we have babies, right? How often do boys get sent home in blue blankets and girls get sent home in pink blankets? So we have little ways to code gender from the very beginning of life. Also, often when we think about gender, we tie gender to sex. And what I mean about that is the ABCs: anatomy, biology, and chromosomes. So we assume that one's gender aligns with their sex. So then from there, we express it through everything from clothing to haircuts to mannerisms to interests. But does it always work? Does every person fit well into that binary? And here's a question: does everyone's biological sex fit into the box of male or female? What do you think? Put it in the chat box. We've got a nope. That's correct. So while we're typically familiar with male and female, there are also, yes, not at all. There are also folks who are born intersex. People who are born intersex have reproductive or sexual anatomy that does not fit into our typical understandings of male or female. So some folks are born with XXY chromosomes, for example. And for some, this is recognized early on in life. So particularly if there's genitalia that does not appear solely male or female, often that will be noticed immediately in the hospital when a child is born. But sometimes it's not recognized until puberty, when puberty doesn't go the way that a person thinks it will, or even when someone's trying to get pregnant and having struggles, they might find out then that they are intersex. There are a lot of different ways to be intersex, just like there are a lot of ways to be male or female. Along with that, does everyone fit neatly into dominant understandings of gender? Does male and female fit for everyone? No. Great. So while we recognize gender and we learn about gender from our communities, gender is self-identified. We perceive other people's gender and make assumptions based on what we've been taught about how people express gender. But at the end of the day, each of us determines for ourselves what our gender is and how we express it. So some people's gender matches what was assigned to them at birth. They are cisgender. So what I mean by that is if when you were born and the doctor told your parents, it's a girl, and you still identify as a girl, you're probably cisgender. Same with if you were born and the doctor says, this is a boy, and you still identify as male, you are cisgender. And why this word matters is sometimes in spaces, transgender people would share their gender, and then a cisgender person would say, well, I'm a woman, but I'm a real woman. And that language can be really harmful to the trans community because a trans woman is a woman as much as anyone else. So cisgender gives way of saying, I'm not transgender, but this is how I identify. While some people's gender matches what they were assigned at birth, some people's doesn't. And those whose gender does not match what they were assigned at birth may be transgender. So just like cisgender, there's more than one way to be transgender or outside of gender as we typically talk about it. These are some words around gender. Are any of them unfamiliar to you? If so, type them in the chat box and I will give you a definition. Mahu. Mahu is a third gender recognized in Indigenous Hawaiian and Tahitian cultures. So that's another really cool thing is that even in our different cultures, there are different words used for gender. So we got Mahu, demi boy, and demi girl. These are like ish, if you were to put ish at the end of boy or girl. So this is when someone feels like they are a boy or a man, but not fully that, or a girl or a woman, but not fully that. And we're seeing that language become more and more popular in some of our youth experiences. Muxe, which is the M-U-X-E, that is a third gender recognized in Oaxaca, Mexico. Generally, it's for people who were assigned male at birth, but take on traditionally feminine roles. Agender, that is to be without gender. So some people, if they identify as transgender, they might align still with male or female or in between. People who are agender believe that they are outside of the gender binary completely. Great questions. Can you think of any other words that you know around gender? Feel free to put them in the chat box if there are any others that come to mind. All right, we will move along. So what are some of the ways we express gender? Throw them in the chat box. What are tools you use to express your gender? Clothing, hair, absolutely. So those are a few. Some others, makeup, yes, definitely. Some people also use medical treatment, but not necessary. For the transgender community and the non-binary community, some people may consider gender affirming surgeries so that their bodies match how they feel. They might use hormones, estrogen or testosterone, and things like that. But not everyone that's transgender necessarily transitions medically. Either one, they might not want to, or two, it can be incredibly expensive. So it is not accessible to everyone. And then there are pronouns. So pronouns are when we don't want to use someone's name over and over again, we use them, short words that help us know who we're talking about. Pronouns are often gendered and can be a way we express gender. So often, but not always, she, her, hers are feminine pronouns. Often, but not always, he, him, his are masculine pronouns. That's not it though. While we live in a culture that likes binaries, this or that, boy or girl, more and more people are recognizing that this binary doesn't work for everyone. Some non-binary people, people whose gender doesn't fit so easily into male or female, may identify with both of these genders or outside of them, and may use other pronouns. Right now, one set of pronouns that is pretty familiar and typical for the non-binary community are they, them, their. So I use they, them, their. And I know this can be tricky for some people, right? I hear often that for the English language, this is hard because we're taught in school that they, them, their is plural. And it's true, they, them, there is plural, but they've also been used in academia for quite some time as gender neutral language and have recently been recognized as such in some popular dictionaries. So that's a shift in our thinking that takes some practicing, right? If you studied language at all in school, sometimes these things are hard, but the more you practice using them, the better you get. So along with that, some people use no pronouns, and this could be because maybe they feel like their gender fluctuates and it's hard to choose a pronoun that fits, or they might use multiple pronouns. So along with being a pastor, I run a drop-in center for LGBT youth, and more of our youth are using multiple pronouns. So you'll see on the screen, they, he, and they, she. Often if people use multiple pronouns, they would like other people to use those pronouns too, and not just whichever pronoun is easiest for them to use. And that can be a little confusing when you're conjugating sentences. but it's important to try. Some people might use pronouns in some spaces and different pronouns in other, and it could be because they don't feel safe using their pronouns everywhere. So like for our drop-in centers, when we've got youth come, we ask them for their name and pronouns. And then we also ask them, are you comfortable being greeted by other youth from the drop-in center in public? And if so, do you want us to use those pronouns, or are these pronouns only for this safe space? So things to think about. For people who are non-binary, they, them, their is pretty typical. And I would say if you're only going to learn one additional set of pronouns beyond she, her, hers, and he, him, his, they, them, their is probably the easiest. But here are some neopronouns. And neopronouns are also pronouns that can express gender outside of the binary. These are often new and not always typical. So just out of curiosity, have you heard of any of these pronoun sets before? We've got they, a, per, they, thee, and thee. Nope, right there with you. Yeah, how interesting. So many different ways, right? And language is fascinating. I was joking beforehand that ideally you would have a 13-year-old leading this because they're so good and they're using the internet to talk about these things and create new language even still. So other ways that people can use pronouns. Again, don't worry, you don't have to know all of these to be a thoughtful, considerate person, but I thought I'd introduce you to some today. And afterwards, I will put a glossary into the chat box so that you can kind of have something to hold on to after the presentation. So one of the best ways to get used to pronouns is to practice. So I thought we would do a little practice. I'm going to put some fill in the blanks on the screen, and I invite you to put in the pronouns that you think would fit for them in the chat box. Here we go. So using they, them, their pronouns, complete these sentences. Charlie went to the park. Blank met up with blank friend Taylor. How would you use they, them, their pronouns in those sentences? Great. Charlie went to the park. They met up with their friend Taylor. Perfect. Nailed it. I live with my grandma, and it took her a while to get used to my pronouns of they, them, their, but she practices like this all the time. And it's kind of funny to hear her and my aunt on the phone practicing and correcting each other. So here we'll try some neopronouns. If someone uses fay, fair, fairs, how would you fill in these sentences? Austin brought blank book to the pool. Blank likes to read more than swim. Give it a try, and it's okay if you're wrong. Great. So close, but not quite. It would be Austin brought fair book to the pool. Faye liked to read more than swim. So that would be fair. Okay, if this person uses no pronouns, how would you fill in the blanks? Tina left blank keys inside. It wasn't until blank reached the car that blank realized this. And no pronouns sometimes doesn't sound as nice as we'd like it to, but it's probably just what you think it is. So give it a try. Tina left the keys inside the car. It wasn't until Tina reached the car that Tina realized this. Yes, absolutely. And that sounds a little funny to us, right? There's a reason why we like pronouns. They sound kind of nice, but that's just right. So good job. So if this person uses both she, her, hers, and they, them, their pronouns, how would you fill this out? A hint, there are multiple ways. So just try using both of those in these sentences. Do we need a little bit of help here? Yeah, no worries. So one example could be Arnie wrote her first book when they were only 5 years old. She loves to go to the library and imagine their books on the shelves one day. So that's really tricky, right? Because you've got different pronouns all at the same times. And some people are really comfortable doing that. And others might do all of those sentences with one pronoun and then in a different conversation use other ones. So don't worry if that was a little tricky. All right. So that was some examples of practicing with pronouns. And in the glossary I will give to you, there's kind of a little conjugation chart so that you can keep practicing with those pronouns. Sometimes what people want to know often is, how do you know someone's pronouns and don't mess up? Right? I find that often that's an important question. Maybe you're at the grocery store and the clerk, you're just not sure, right? So one way is to ask. A great way to find out someone's pronouns is to share your own and ask them. So I might say, hi, my name's Andy and my pronouns are they, them, their. What's your name and pronouns? And that gives a person a chance to answer, and you've normalized it by giving your own. So I'm going to invite you now to try, if you're comfortable using Zoom, changing your name and putting your pronouns. You don't have to do it if you're not comfortable, but try now to add your pronouns, whether they're they, them, their, he, him, his, or she, her, hers. This is a great way to kind of show solidarity to transgender people, because they see you've shared your pronouns so they can share theirs. Great. Good. I see some people have found it. More and more people are also sharing their pronouns in their little kind of closing piece of the email or on business cards. And this can be a nice way to signal that you are aware that people have varying pronouns and that you would be a safe person to disclose those to. So this is one way to be an ally, and it normalizes that. Sometimes though, folks might not feel safe sharing their pronouns. So that's the thing that comes up. Often people are like, demand everyone gives you their pronouns. I like to say don't, because you never know if somebody's not out yet or doesn't feel safe in a space. I like to encourage pronouns, but if someone doesn't give them, we just trust that there's a reason for that and hope that when the time is right, they'll feel comfortable sharing. Let's see what else. Yes. So this can be really tricky with youth. As I shared earlier, they might use some pronouns in different spaces. I have youth who I know in this Outlook in the drop-in center. And then also I know out in the community. And there are times when they're using certain pronouns and names in the drop-in center, but not in the community. And that can be very tricky to not mess up. To make sure that you're using the right one in the right space, and to hope that if you do mess up, that you do it in the safest way, so that way there won't be issues for them. Which brings up the next piece, right? What do I do if I mess up, right? No one wants to hurt people. Okay, maybe some people want to hurt people, but I like to think most often we're trying to be generous and we're just struggling because this is new to us. My biggest tip is don't make a scene, right? You may feel embarrassed, but don't apologize 1,000 times or make it about yourself, because then the person whose pronouns you messed up is forced to comfort you. So if you use the wrong pronouns for me and then you go, oh my gosh, Andy, I'm a terrible person. I'm horrible. And I just don't understand. And it's so hard. Suddenly I'm having to consult you because you made a mistake. So the best way to do it is just to say, oops, so sorry. And then to show that you know the correct pronouns. So if you messed up my pronouns, you could say, oops, so sorry, Andy, they were, and then fix the sentence that you used. So and then move on, right? Don't guilt yourself over it and don't, just move on. It happens and it will be okay. Another thing is, if you hear somebody else misusing somebody's pronouns, correct them, because it can be kind of tiring to have to be the one to correct other people for yourself all the time. So if you witness it, you could say, hey, actually their pronouns are this. Happy to help you practice that if you need some help. So that's kind of the material I have for you now. I invite you now, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, you're welcome to unmute yourself, or if you feel more comfortable putting them in the chat box, I'm happy to answer questions you have about gender and pronouns, or if you've got any questions from my experience as a non-binary person, happy to check those out with you.
Hi, this is Valerie, and I'm also here with my husband, Brian. Our oldest child is non-binary. That's why we're here. And we're just trying to get better at the pronouns. So my husband was just asking, how do we know if they, I almost said she, if they want they, or if they want some of those what do you call them, non-pronoun or
Neopronouns.
neopronouns.
Yeah.
Just ask them.
Yeah, I would just ask them, say, hey, we're really working on this pronoun thing. And what pronouns do you want us to learn how to use for you?
Yep. And you mentioned 13-year-olds presenting this. We have a 13-year-old niece, and she is so good at reminding us that our child uses they.
Yeah. Teens are, not all teens, but they're mostly really, really good at this stuff. And I think, again, too, so I studied Spanish before, and I've also taught English to groups of people. Children and teens pick it up so much faster. Their brains are still able to make those shifts, where as we get older, I think it's a little harder. So
yeah. Also, one other, I don't want to monopolize, I apologize, but what tips do you have for getting my mother, who's 87, to start using these pronouns?
Yeah, great question. Once you know for sure what pronouns your child uses, there are like pronoun pins and t-shirts and stuff, and they might like having those so that when they're in spaces, there's a visible reminder for other people to use the correct pronouns, right? It's helpful on name badges and that sort of stuff to have that. For grandma, how are they open to learning about this, would you say, or are they?
I would say somewhat.
Yeah,
they definitely love them very much. They were the first grandchild, so
okay.
but I think she's also, they were born the only female grandchild.
Yeah.
So that makes it difficult for my mother to think that they are non-binary.
So one, I want to acknowledge that there can be kind of a sense of grieving and loss for families that are experiencing this, right? Because the way that you knew your child or your grandchild now is they're telling you that it's different from who they are. So I think making space for the grandmother to express those feelings to you and not to your child is really important, right? Because it can be painful as the non-binary person to hear that that's a loss for a family, because we're living our best life, we're being who we are. But making space for grandma to express that to you, I think could be really helpful, and acknowledging that. And then reminding them, right, this is the child that you've loved since the beginning. They are the same person that you knew, but these pronouns really help them feel better and safer in their being. So we're going to try our hardest to use them, and we're happy to help you. If pronouns are hard, just use a name, right? That's where that not using any pronouns. Sometimes for some people, they're like, this pronoun thing is tricky, so I'm just going to call you Andi all the time. And my sentences will sound ugly, but it works.
That's what we do sometimes. They live in Arizona, so we don't see them as much. So we always say, oh, we don't have to do it, they're not here, but we really need to.
Yeah.
All the time. So thank you. Those were great advice. And I'm sorry, everyone, please, someone else jump in. I don't want to monopolize.
Valerie, you're fine. Andi, can I ask, how did you come to know that you were non-binary? Like, what did that, if you're willing to share, like, what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question and a really hard question, right? I feel like everybody wants to understand that better. And there's no like one moment. I can't say this was the moment, but it was kind of a series of things. So I can point to a few times as a child and youth wanting to express myself in ways that weren't, that of the gender I was assigned at birth, and being corrected for it. So I was assigned female at birth. And that's something that trans people, they don't have to tell you, but I'm choosing to tell you that, so that you can learn and understand a bit. But I remember as a kid, like the way that I would dance and being told by my aunt, like you dance like a boy, right? And not understanding what that meant or why it was a problem. Or when I got glasses, I'm at Costco getting glasses and I'm just picking out a cool pair. And I hadn't recognized what section I'd chosen them from, but they were from the men's section. And a family member was like, do you really have to do that now and here? And they didn't get it then and stuff, but things like that. And then the way I felt in my body, it didn't quite feel like it was a good fit, the body that I had, and like my voice. So things like that just didn't quite feel like a right fit, but I knew I wasn't a boy either. That didn't feel right. And really, I didn't come out as non-binary publicly until this past year. So kind of taking the time to explore that, to play with pronouns with trusted friends who I thought could be on that journey with me, who could try out pronouns and a new name before I shared it with everyone, really helped. And reading other people's experiences. Thank God for libraries, right? Because they have those resources where we can read stories and see if like, does this connect to my experience or does this not quite feel right either? Is that helpful?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, definitely. Okay. And if anyone else has a question, I'm just throwing questions out that I came up with that people might be wanting to know. And one of the things I had read was you don't ask a trans person what their sex at birth was.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain to all of it, like, why wouldn't you? Is it offensive? Is it rude? Is it none of our business?
Yeah. And so that's, again, one where, again, people's experiences are different. Some people may be quite comfortable to choose to share that with you, but often for us, we see ourselves as the gender that we identify with. And so when people want to know what we were assigned at birth, it can almost be heard as like, you're trying to see me in the way that I don't see myself, right? So it's almost like a desire to invalidate my current gender. Now, it does get tricky, right? Because still with medical things and such, doctors and people might have to check in to know what you've got going on biologically so that they can provide you with proper care.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for that answer. Okay. Anyone else have a question, or I'm just going to keep asking?
I
Okay.
was just going to ask, I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump in.
No, go ahead, Valerie.
Do you think that many non-binary people change their name, do you think? Or our child is talking about changing their name. I'll just say their name at birth was Melanie and they go by Mel now. Mm-hmm. But not legally. Their legal name is Melanie. So do a lot of people change it, or do they stay, or what kind of advice should we give them about that? Or
great question. There's a mix. Some people will keep their name, right? And some people just happen to get a nice gender neutral name. So it works out when their gender changes. But a lot of people do choose to change their names. And in the drop-in center, which I've got like 25 youth who are active in it, we see 10 to 15. Most of our youth have a name that most of them aren't, it hasn't been changed legally yet, but they have a name they go by that's not their legal name or their birth name. Some tips on that, it can be quite a process. I changed my name. There is a group called the Transformative Justice Legal Project. I'm putting it in the chat box too, and they can help with name changes, which is huge because it can be tricky. I think I almost filed a civil court case against myself when I tried to change my name because they use acronyms in the law world and they don't put explanations, and it's really hard. So they made the process really easy for me and they did it for free. So if you check out their website, they've got an intake, and especially if you're helping a minor, you as the adult can fill out that form and they can help you with that.
Oh, they're 30, so.
Oh, okay. Then they can fill it out. And you said Arizona, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Arizona. So this is in Illinois. Arizona might have a different group that's doing that work.
Okay. But
yeah,
we're in Illinois and they do come here sometimes. So, but I don't know if their legal residence makes a deal. Well, we'll look into it. Anyways,
right.
It's a good
Yeah.
place to start.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And my advice there would be make sure you really like your name before you change it, because it is a process, right?
Right.
And once you change your name legally, then you've got to change your your name on social security, passports, driver's license, all of that. It's been almost a year since I changed my name legally, and I still have a few credit cards and things with my old name just because it takes a while and a lot of energy to make all those phone calls.
Yeah, and I think that's why they haven't done it. And also since they've gone by Mel since they were fairly young, just it was their nickname.
Mhm.
So it's nothing that's odd. So
Right.
I think that's another reason that they haven't actually gone forward.
Mhm. And you can choose, right? If changing it legally is important and necessary, some people find for safety that it's really important for them to have IDs that have the name that they want to be people to call them by. But other people are like, I know who I am and I feel safe and good, and this paperwork's a pain in the butt. So I'm good to go with what I've got.
So did they have to change your name, like go back and change your birth certificate as well in all the name changing? I don't know how this works.
Yeah, great question. I haven't had that piece done yet, but I had to send it into the Social Security office. So they changed it on my Social Security. And like I'm applying for other grad school programs right now, and my transcripts still have my old name. But fortunately, because I changed it on Social Security, there have been no issues. So really, Social Security and driver's license, I would say, are the big ones. For me, I think like your insurance cards for your car, that would be a good one to change. I, had an incident where I was like, "Ooh, I have not changed that yet," and that could have been an issue here. So I think those are some of the biggies. Really, with like credit cards and other things, the only thing is like if you don't want people seeing your old name, which the phrase for that some people use is dead name. They describe their birth name as their dead name.
Yeah, our daughter says that. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, I said
Child.
Child.
No worries, right? This is why we're here. We're practicing together.
They laugh at me because sometimes I say it wrong and right in the same sentence.
Yeah, it's learning a new language. It really is.
Yep, I've told them that I'm trying, and I hope that they understand that.
Yeah. In my staff review last year, our staff parish relations committee, again, are trying really hard and have been incredibly wonderful in learning what it means to be non-binary with me, but they wrote they is throughout the thing, right? Trying to singularize they. So as they is good at this, or they is, and it was very sweet, right? But we worked that out together. So we're all learning and how to do it well.
It can be challenging just because of the singular plural.
Yeah. Yep.
That's the big one. I'll say to someone, they live in Arizona, and they'll, my friend will say, "Oh, is Mel dating?"
Yep.
No, just them.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's where it gets confusing. We have really enjoyed this talk, by the way, I will say.
Wonderful. Good. And again, if there are other conversations, I'm happy to leave contact info. Or if you'd like to learn about Youth Outlook, I'd be great for that. Can I share a website or phone number for a support group for people going through this transition? Yes. And so since we've got parents in the group, Youth Outlook, the group that I do kind of my side gig, my passion gig with, they also have a virtual group for parents of transgender children, usually of transgender children and teens, but they might be ready to expand beyond that. So if you're looking for that space, that'll be really helpful. But youthoutlook.org, and they have drop-in centers that are virtual and in person for youth ages 12 to 20 who are part of the LGBT community or allies. And this is space where youth can have resources and explore safely questions about gender and sexuality. They also have parent groups and they do community outreach. So if you have a workplace or a place that would like to learn about how to support LGBT people and particularly youth more, they do that. Some fun things, they've got 2 new centers opening up in Will County, so they'll be in 7 counties. And we're currently working with a group of grandparents at a senior living facility who are grandparents of transgender children, and they want a support group. So some cool things there.
Is the Youth Outlook group a faith-based group, or is it something that, like, say, a library or something could host?
It's not faith-based. When it started in the 90s, right, it was really hard for youth to be able to say, hey, mom and dad, I'm going to go to a group for gay kids. So most of the centers are in faith buildings because it was easier at the time for people to say, I'm going to youth group. But it's not faith oriented. So yeah, and I think it would be such a gift for us to have more centers that are not in faith communities, because I know that that can absolutely be a barrier for some people. Entering a church building or a synagogue or a temple might not feel comfortable.
Okay. So our next, I'm gonna hit you with another question. Are non-binary people always, sometimes, never part of the LGBTQ plus community?
So I would say usually, yes, they are part of the community. I think the word transgender can kind of be seen as an umbrella term, and it could include transgender women and transgender men and non-binary people. So I think they fit into the T, and every person has a gender identity and a sexual orientation. So I, again, identify as non-binary for gender, and for sexual orientation. And again, this is a word that I know some people don't like, but has been reclaimed a lot in the community. I use queer, right? And so you could be non-binary and you could be bisexual, or you could be non-binary and straight. Though that would be a little difficult, right? What does straight look like when you're non-binary? But yes, often non-binary people are LGBTQ.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, I asked you that one. I asked you that one. Who decided, maybe you don't know, it could be the collective they of the they or the different pronouns? Like, who made all those up?
I don't know. That's a great question and worthy of Google and some serious time and effort. And I think too often within marginalized communities, right, there's kind of these words come up in different spaces and kind of bubble to life. So it can be a little hard at times to find the origin of them. Okay. But great question. That's a fun one. And I should do the research. I'm writing that one down.
Because some of them, I don't know, like the X and the Z one, I've seen them, but I literally have no idea how to pronounce them correctly, because they look hard, or they look awkward to say. I don't know. How do you pronounce XE?
Z, Zim, Zir.
Okay.
Are often, and then the ones that are like HI would be like here. but again, like these are neo and new. Often they're kind of created and you can pronounce them in the way that feels right for you. That's
Okay.
It's interesting for folks in the community. Often there's an openness to some fluidity. So people come up with all sorts of things as pronouns. And I know that drives some people nuts. But my thought with that is like, it's not doing anyone harm, right? We can do what we can to try and use whatever language people are using for themselves. One that is tricky, and I think this maybe will help some people try a little harder on they, them, their. I have youth who are using it as their pronoun. And I think that can be really painful for some of us, right? Because that feels dehumanizing. So maybe that helps you want to try they, them, their a little bit better. Because it would be the singular.
Mm. Yeah,
But
that
we
does
do
seem
have
a
youth
little-
who like that pronoun.
Okay. What is the difference, or is there not, between non-binary and gender fluid?
Great question. For some people, they might use those words interchangeably. Usually non-binary people just don't identify with male or female. And so sometimes, but not always, that can look like an androgyny, kind of a gender neutral presentation. For gender fluid folks, how they present their gender could change on a regular basis. So I have youth who some days identify with she, her pronouns and feel like women, and other days are non-binary, and other days are masculine. And so for our group check-ins, we always ask, for name and pronouns. So for those who fluctuate, they have the space to use different pronouns each time.
Okay, and that can be confusing.
Yes, I'm reading it
And
right
I'm
now.
saying that in like the most non-judgmental way, but as you're
Yes.
explaining that, I was like, that's confusing.
Oh yeah, it can be confusing. And that's where it gets really easy to mess it up, right? Because if I don't know your pronouns every day, well, I'm gonna mess it up. There's a really great young adult book that I'm reading right now about a gender fluid person. And each chapter, they start with the pronouns that the person is using in that chapter. Let me see if I can find what the name of it is. So it's called Can't Take That Away by Steven Salvatore. I'll put that in the chat. And it's kind of cool. In this story, this high school student, one of their teachers who gets it, gives them a gift of like friendship bracelets with different colors, so that that day they can wear the friendship bracelet that fits with their gender identity. And I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, this will probably be my last question because I know I run out of time. What is the best thing that everyday, non-binary people, or anyway, people in general, we're all people. What is the best thing we can do to be an ally?
Mm-hmm. Great question. I think it's trying as much as possible to see the person as they want to be seen, right? So it's learning that name and pronouns. It's paying attention to the ways that they identify and trying to adjust accordingly. So like sometimes tricky things that I experience are I still get invited into a lot of women only spaces. And that doesn't feel good because I don't see myself as a woman, right? So sometimes people are trying to be inclusive, but if it's women only, then as a non-binary person, that doesn't feel like the right fit for me. So thinking about those things is, am I using the name and pronouns that this person wants? And am I really trying to see them as they see themselves? Or am I just using a different name, but I still see them as their gender assigned at birth? And that takes a lot of work, and it takes time to reprogram ourselves to look at people, because we've been trained our whole lives that this is what a boy is, this is what a girl is, and that's kind of it. We've got some exceptions for tomboys, right? And for things like that, but not too much.
Okay. Thank you. I always hated that tomboy, like growing up when I was a kid. It was like, oh, she's a tomboy. And I thought, just, like, just because a girl wants to climb a tree doesn't mean, it's like, why can't we just do what we want to do and not have this, I don't know how we said it back then, but how I think we would say it today is this gender construct, forced upon us. Like, why can't we just be people?
And I think that's the gift, right? As more people come out as transgender and non-binary, that's a gift that they give to cisgender people too, is that there's just more space for us to be who we are, right? That even if you are a cisgender woman, you can have short hair and wear only pants and like to run around, and maybe you don't shave, and that's just fine. And you can be a boy who cries and wears dresses and whatever, right? So I think that's a gift that hopefully we can continue to expand and do, so people can just be themselves.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions for Andi before we let them go for the night and let all of you go for the night? My biggest problem is to learn to wait in the silence for people. I just want to be like, okay, that's it. Okay. If we don't have any, I'm recording this. If you want to watch it again, I will have it up on the library's YouTube channel tomorrow. If you want more information, Andi just put her email, their email. See, I did it. Their email address up for you. And if you don't find that, you can always call or email me at the library and I can hook you up with Andi. All right, great. Thank you everyone for coming. And Andi, thank you so much for just being transparent and letting me ask probing questions and everybody else. And thank you just for your patience and just for educating and just helping bring greater understanding.
You're welcome. Thank you all for wanting to learn and for showing up tonight.
All right, thanks. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time.